In this video, you will learn why most presentation advice is misguided, what are the characteristics of effective and powerful business presentations, and then lastly, we're going to talk about how to create self-explanatory slides and what are the components of effective slides. First, I want to talk about the different types of presentations and how to define business presentations. Presentations in general is such a broad topic, and there's so much advice out there that I think is unfortunately far from what is effective in today's business world. I categorize presentations into two broad categories. On the one side, keynote presentations, and on the other side, business presentations. Keynotes is what you most of the time see online. When you watch videos of TED conferences, when you watch product introductions by Silicon Valley companies, Apple keynotes, Google keynotes. Those types of presentations are keynotes. And how are they different from business presentations? A couple of things. Typically, keynotes is where one person presents in front of a very large audience. It is a one-way communication where one person presents for 20 minutes, for 45, and there are typically no questions. It's a fairly staged presentation. The whole presentation tends to be scripted. It's pretty clear what the person says when. Typically, it flows very, very well. There aren't many interruptions or any hiccups. And typically, the presenter has a lot of credibility. It's the CEO presenting. It's the head of product, chief strategist, the chief strategist, or it's a scientist, an expert in their field presenting on the TED stage and sharing their knowledge. And business presentations, on the other hand, are quite different. It's the number one tool for internal corporate communication nowadays. And that's what the top management consulting companies do every day. It's what McKinsey, BCG, Deloitte, Accenture, what those companies produce, but also what you would create on a daily basis. And business presentations are fairly different from keynotes. Typically, it's more of a smaller audience, 4 or 5 people, maybe 10, but rarely it's more than 20, 30 people. They are typically more discussions than presentations. So you bring your business presentations, you have a plan what to share with your group, but then after a couple minutes, somebody asks a question, there are decisions to be made. You almost want it to be a discussion. The better business presentations are discussions. If you just want to share information, it's typically better not to have a specific meeting and share the information via email. In addition of it being a discussion, more than a simple one-way communication, the audience typically needs convincing. The presenter doesn't have a lot of credibility. It is common for somebody more junior to present to someone more senior. And so the presenter doesn't have a lot of credibility and needs to convince the audience, convince his attendees of his argumentation, of his recommendations, which is why business presentations need more data. They need more evidence. So to summarize, there's a big difference between keynote presentations and business presentations. On the one side, keynote presentations are fairly staged, one-way communication. There isn't a lot of proof necessary for what the people are saying because they already have credibility. And on the other hand, business presentations are more discussions. The presenter needs to convince the audience, typically with data, with evidence, and that obviously has an impact on the type of slides you need to create. Keynote presentations are very simple slides, only one picture on a slide, one data point, while business presentations are more text heavy, more data heavy to provide evidence for your story and for your presentation. The distinction between business presentations and keynotes is very important because a lot of advice is keynote advice. When you look where especially younger people early in their career, students, learn their presentation skills, get asked how they learn their presentation skills and what they think are great presentations, they typically would say TED conferences, Steve Jobs presentations. And also a lot of advice online is from more minimalistic keynote type of coaches and experts. The problem is that most of us will primarily do business presentations inside a company, small group presentations, convincing the audience, discussions and not do keynotes. You're probably not the head of product in your company. You're probably not the CEO. So you will probably not do a bunch of keynote presentations in your career. That's why this course will focus on business presentations. And the key thing to remember is that business presentations need to be understood without a presenter. That is usually a controversial topic. Many people argue, why even present if you can just read the presentation? My counter argument is that presentations serve as a discussion support. They serve as something to be shared. When the CEO or your supervisor asks you to share your presentation, you better have it ready and it has to be structured in a way that it can be understood by your supervisor. That doesn't mean that all your business presentations need to have a lot of detail. The level of detail here on the x-axis varies based on the type of format, the type of presentation, and your audience. Obviously, if you present with the CEO, you will have to provide less detail and the presentation has to be higher level. Nevertheless, your presentation still needs to be self-explanatory, have a clear message, clear supporting evidence. On the other hand, if you present to a more technical audience, you go into the details, then you will have to provide more detail, more content on your slides. Let's quickly recap. This course will focus on business presentations. That is also where you will spend most of your time throughout your career, which is why I think it's so critical to focus on business presentations as opposed to the minimalistic one image on a slide keynote presentations. Next, I want to quickly introduce on a very high level what business presentation slides look like and what each of them should have. The simplest way to structure your business presentations is to have a header, which summarizes the slide's message, and then use the slide's body to provide clear supporting argumentation and evidence to support your message. And then at the bottom, provide sources and annotations and slide numbers, date, file name, etc. But the key thing is to have the slide's message in the header and then supporting evidence in the slide's body. Let's look at a couple examples of business presentation slides and reflect on what we've just learned and said. Here we're looking at I think pretty decent slide by McKinsey. The slide's message is in the title, saying that policy and politics related risks are the key threats to continued growth. And so as discussed, in the body, you want to have supporting evidence for this message. And what McKinsey did here is they conducted a survey where they asked people what they think the biggest threats are to economic growth. And the key insights are that the two categories on the left-hand side are policy and politics related risks. And so that's their key message. And then at the bottom, they provide a little bit more detail about the survey, how many people they surveyed, in which time frame. And they also tell us that there were actually more categories, but they only showed us the top 5, which is another useful tool. You always want to show the key supporting evidence that supports your message. You don't have to show the whole data. It's actually even better to adjust, to edit your data so it supports exactly your message. Overall, I would say this is a pretty decent slide. Clear message, supporting evidence, supporting data to support your message. Pretty strong. The next example, which is more of a conceptual summary slide. Similarly to the previous slide, there is one key message, 4 primary impacts from splitting Denali. Here they're saying, if we split this company, there will be 4 impacts. The supporting evidence in the body of the slide has on the left-hand side the proposed split. So they're conceptually telling us how they would split it. And then on the right-hand side, the 4 primary impacts: cost synergies, strategy and execution, market valuation, and transaction costs. And then a little bit more detail under each of the impacts, how that would benefit us. I think this is also a pretty decent slide, more of a conceptual slide, while the previous one was a data-driven slide showing a nice chart. And so in practice, you will mix between different types of slides, but I personally prefer the previous one, which was more of a data-driven slide.